The waiting room at St. Mercy smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, the kind that sits on the burner too long and turns bitter. I had been sitting in that plastic chair for 2 hours, watching the same loop of a morning talk show on the mounted TV in the corner, when the woman beside me leaned over and slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. She was maybe 40, dark coat, no jewelry except a small cross at her throat. I had not spoken to her once. She had not spoken to me, she said, very quietly. Read this when you're alone. Not here. Then she stood up and walked out through the sliding glass doors, and I never saw her again. I sat there, holding that paper like it might burn me. My daughter was in the back somewhere, talking to the doctor about my husband's test results, the results I was not supposed to see yet, the results she had specifically asked the nurse to share with her first. She had told me it was because she wanted to prepare me. Those were her exact words. I want to be there to prepare you, Mom. I had thought that was love. I did not open the note. I put it in the front pocket of my cardigan, and I sat there until my daughter came through the double doors, with that carefully arranged expression on her face. The one that looked like concern, but had always, even when she was a teenager, meant something else entirely. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, and I know how to read a face. You teach children long enough, you learn the difference between a child who is scared and a child who is performing scared. Those are two very different things. My daughter is 41. Her husband works in finance. They have a house in Glendale that is larger than any house 2 people without children need, and they have been talking about my husband Edmund's care. His costs, his needs, his situation, for about 8 months now, ever since his first stroke. Edmund had the stroke the previous January. A mild one, the doctors said, though I do not know what is mild about watching your husband of 38 years not be able to remember the word for spoon for 4 days. He recovered most of it. The word came back. His left hand was slower than before, and he tired easily, and he could no longer drive. But he was still Edmund. He still made his terrible puns at breakfast. He still watched the birds at the feeder outside the kitchen window and narrated what they were doing like a nature documentary. He was still my person, but the tests that month had come back with some things the cardiologist wanted to look at more closely. Which was why we were at St. Mercy. Which was why my daughter had driven us there. All cheerful helpfulness, holding Edmund's arm in the parking lot, squeezing my shoulder in the elevator. The doctor kept her for a long time. I sat with the paper in my pocket. When she finally came back out, she said, Edmund's numbers were not great but stable. She said the doctor wanted to discuss next steps. She said we should think about what level of care Edmund might need going forward, whether the house was manageable long term, whether we had thought about. And here she paused, just a half beat too long. Our estate planning. I said Edmund was right there in the back, waiting for us to come get him. She said, I know, Mom. I'm just saying we should be thinking ahead. I said, let's go get your father. We drove home in her car, the 3 of us, Edmund in the front seat, because he liked the window, me in the back. He talked about the clouds the whole way home. He said one of them looked like a basset hound. He said another one looked like the state of Florida. I watched the back of his head and I thought, whatever is on that paper, I am not ready for it. I made us all tea when we got home. My daughter stayed for a while, sitting at the kitchen table, and her husband called twice. Both times she stepped into the hallway to answer. I could hear pieces of it. Not yet. I don't know. She didn't ask. Things like that. She left around 4. She hugged me at the door and said to call her if I needed anything and to think about what she had said about next steps. I closed the door. Edmund had fallen asleep in his chair by the window, the bird feeder just outside, the afternoon light coming in at that low winter angle that made everything look golden and a little sad. I stood there looking at him for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen table and I took the paper out of my pocket and I read it. It said, "The man your son-in-law met with last Tuesday is an estate attorney who specializes in capacity assessments. Your daughter signed something at the hospital 3 months ago. Check your husband's advance directive. Check who is listed as decision maker." I'm sorry, I couldn't stay quiet. There was no name, no number, nothing else. I read it 4 times. Then I put the kettle back on because I did not know what else to do with my hands. I want to tell you that I immediately knew what to do, that I picked up the phone and called someone or drove somewhere or confronted my daughter that same night. That is not what happened. What happened is that I sat at that kitchen table until the kettle screamed, and then I made tea I did not drink, and then I sat some more. Edmund slept. The birds came to the feeder and left. The light changed from gold to gray to dark. I have been a practical woman my whole life. I taught 37 years of 8-year-olds. I organized the school's winter fundraiser for a decade. I kept our finances, filed our taxes, managed Edmund's medications after the stroke with a color-coded chart on the refrigerator. I am not a woman who panics, but I am also a woman who spent 41 years believing her daughter was her closest friend. And that belief was not a small thing to set down. I did not sleep that night. In the morning, I waited until Edmund was settled with his breakfast and his birds, and I went to the filing cabinet in the den, the tall gray one Edmund called the document graveyard, and I pulled the folder labeled Legal, and I went through it piece by piece. Our wills were there, our living will, Edmund's advance directive, which he had updated 2 years ago after a scare with his brother, who had ended up on life support and left no instructions. We had updated everything together. I had been present. I had signed as witness. I read the advance directive twice. The primary decision-maker listed was me. The secondary, should I be unable to serve, was listed as our daughter. That was as it should be. But there was another document behind it that I did not remember. A single sheet, different paper stock, with a date from 3 months ago, the same window the note had mentioned, and Edmund's signature at the bottom. His left-hand signature, the one that had been unsteady since the stroke. The one that looked different from his old signature. The one that a person might argue was a signature made under diminished capacity. The document amended his advance directive. It listed our daughter as primary decision-maker. My name was not on it. I need to stop here and tell you something about my son-in-law, because I think some of you may be wondering why I am not talking about him more. His name is not worth repeating here, but I will tell you that he is the kind of man who is very charming at a dinner table and very different when he thinks no one important is watching. I had noticed things over the years. The way he talked over my daughter in front of company and then was generous in private when it mattered. The way he tracked money, not just managed it, but tracked it, mentally, all the time, who had what, who owed what things were worth. When Edmund and I bought the land outside Sedalia 20 years ago, 12 acres with a creek and an old barn we had plans for that we never got around to, my son-in-law had opinions about it that I found unusual for a man who had no stake in it. He asked questions. He asked what we planned to do with it eventually. He asked once at Thanksgiving whether we had thought about putting it in a trust. I had thought he was being helpful. Edmund had thought he was being nosy. Edmund, it turned out, was the better reader of people. I did not call my daughter. I called a woman I had gone to church with for 20 years, a woman named, and I will not say her name here because she is a private person, but a woman who had worked as a paralegal for 15 years before she retired and who had, several times over the years, mentioned offhandedly that if I ever had a legal question, I should ask her before I paid anyone. I had always smiled, and said I hoped. I never needed to. She came over the next afternoon while Edmund was at his cardiac rehab appointment, and I showed her what I had found, and I watched her face change. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked how old Edmund was during his last competency screening. I said he had not had a formal one, only the standard stroke follow-up cognitive tests, which he had passed with high marks. She asked if I had been present when the amended document was signed. I said I had not known it existed. She asked if Edmund knew. I said I did not know. She took photos of everything. She told me not to move anything. She told me to write down every conversation I could remember, with dates, and to do it that day while it was fresh. She gave me the name of an elder law attorney, not a general attorney, specifically elder law, and she told me to call Monday morning first thing and not to say anything to my daughter until I had spoken to him. "How bad is it?" I asked her. She picked up her coffee cup and looked out the window for a moment. "It depends on what else they've done," she said. "But this is not nothing." I did not sleep that weekend either. Edmund noticed. He did not say anything directly. That is not his way. But on Saturday morning, he brought me coffee without being asked and sat down across from me and said, "You've got your thinking face on." I asked him what his thinking face looked like. He said, "The one where you're deciding whether to tell me something." I looked at him. 38 years of mornings. The bird feeder behind him, a cardinal on the rim. I thought about his signature on that document, the shaky left-hand signature, and I thought about whether he had known what he was signing, or whether someone had put something in front of him during a tired moment and said, "It's just a formality, Dad. Just sign here." I said, "Do you remember signing any papers at the hospital?" "A few months back, not in January, later." He thought about it. He said, "She brought some things for me to sign, said they were updating the records." "She meaning our daughter?" He nodded. "Did you read them?" He was quiet. "She said it was just administrative." I nodded. I picked up my coffee. I said, "Okay." He said, "It wasn't just administrative, was it?" I said, "Let me make some calls first." He said, "Okay." And then he turned back to the window and pointed out that the cardinal had brought a friend, and we sat there together watching two red birds at the feeder in the cold winter morning. And I held myself very still because I knew if I moved too fast I would fall apart, and I could not afford to fall apart yet. The attorney was a compact, quiet man with an office full of plants and framed photos of grandchildren. He had the kind of manner that made you feel like you were talking to someone's grandfather rather than a professional. And I had the sense that this was intentional, that people came to him in crisis and needed to feel held before they could hear hard things. He heard me out without interrupting. He looked at the photos on my phone. He asked the same questions my friend had asked, and a few more. Then he said, "The document may not be enforceable. A signature obtained when capacity is in question without independent witness from someone in a medical setting, there are grounds to challenge. I said, "What do I do?" He said we had several things to do. We needed Edmund formally assessed by a neurologist to establish current capacity. We needed to file a corrected advance directive immediately, witnessed properly. We needed to document everything that had happened and when. And we needed to understand, he said very gently, that if what I suspected was true, that this had been done deliberately, with knowledge, then we were likely not at the end of this. We were at the beginning. "She's my daughter," I said. He said, "I know." I looked at the plant on his desk, a small succulent in a blue pot. Someone was taking care of it. Someone watered it and turned it toward the light. "She used to bring me flowers," I said. "Every birthday, since she was 5. Dandelions from the yard when she was little, and then real ones when she was older. Carnations. She knew I liked carnations." He didn't say anything. He just let me sit with that for a moment. Then I straightened up and I said, "Tell me what we need to do first." We moved fast because he told us to. Edmund was assessed the following week. Full neuropsychological evaluation, 2.5 hours, the kind that is very hard to question later. He scored well. His recall showed some minor gaps consistent with his stroke history, but his judgment, his reasoning, his ability to understand and make decisions, intact. We filed the corrected directive immediately, with my attorney and my church friend both present as witnesses. We changed which hospital had Edmund's records on file. And then I waited. I did not have to wait long. My daughter called on a Thursday evening. She said she had heard from the hospital about some paperwork changes and was confused. Her voice was calm and pleasant, which was how I knew she was not confused at all. I said, "I found the document you had your father sign." There was a long silence. I said, "The one with his left-hand signature, the one he signed because you told him it was administrative." She said, "Mom," I said, "I need you to listen to me right now and not speak." I had rehearsed this. My voice did not shake. "I don't know yet exactly what you were planning. I don't know how much your husband was involved or whose idea it was. What I know is that you went behind my back at a moment when your father was vulnerable, and you changed a legal document that was not yours to change, and you did not tell me. That is what I know." She started to say something. I said, "I'm not finished." I told her I had an attorney. I told her we had corrected the directive and documented everything. I told her that if any further attempt was made to interfere with Edmund's care or our property, we would not be handling it in the family. She started to cry, real tears or not. I could not tell. Once you realize you have been reading a face wrong for years, you stop trusting your own readings. She said, "I was just trying to protect him. You can't always be there. What if something happened and they couldn't reach you, and he needed a decision?" I said, "That's not why." She didn't answer. I said, "I love you. I will always love you. But I need you to understand that I see what happened, and I will not pretend I don't, and there will have to be some time before we can talk again. Do you understand?" she said, very quietly. "Yes." I said goodbye, and I hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Edmund came in eventually and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window. He didn't ask. He knew it had happened. After a while he said, "Cardinal's back." I said, "Is he alone?" Edmund looked. "No," he said. "He's got the other one with him." I got up and stood beside my husband at the window, and we watched the birds together in the dark backyard with the kitchen light behind us. And I let myself feel all of it, the grief, the loss, the strange, awful clarity of knowing something you cannot unknow. I let it move through me. I did not push it away. I want to tell you how it ended because I know you want to know. My son-in-law, when my attorney made certain inquiries, found reason to be very cooperative. The land outside Sedalia is still ours. Edmund's care decisions are mine. The amended document no longer exists in any official capacity. My daughter and I do not speak the way we once did. I do not know if we will again, not in the same way. Some things, once they have happened, change the shape of everything around them. She calls on Sundays. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I let it go to voicemail, and I listen to her voice later, alone, and I try to find in it the daughter I thought I knew, and sometimes I can still hear her. The woman in the waiting room, I never found out who she was. I asked the hospital. I asked my attorney to look into it. Nobody knew. I have thought about her a great deal. She must have been connected to someone, somehow, a colleague of my son-in-law's, a person's with a conscience who knew something and could not carry it quietly. I will never know her name, but I think about the moment she sat down next to me. She could have left the hospital and said nothing. She could have told herself it was not her business, that she did not want to be involved, that these things have a way of working themselves out. People tell themselves those things all the time. It is the easier thing to tell yourself. She chose the harder thing. Edmund had another evaluation 6 months later. Still intact, still narrating the birds. He has started painting them, actually, watercolors, terrible ones, in the most charming way. He gave one to my attorney and one to my church friend. And he gave one to the nurse at the cardiac rehab who always remembers how he takes his coffee. He does not talk about our daughter much. When he does, he talks about her the way you talk about someone you are grieving while they are still alive, carefully, with space around the words. I understand that. I understand it because I am doing it too. I am 67 years old, and I have learned things this year I would have given a great deal not to know. I have also learned that I am harder to break than I believed. That practical women do not become impractical in a crisis. They become more themselves. That a stranger in a waiting room can change everything with one folded piece of paper. That love and watchfulness are not opposites. That sometimes the person who saves you is someone whose name you will never know. And that surviving is not the same as being fine, but it is something. It is, on most days, enough.